This is a Kerbal Space Agency debriefing of the launches for the last 2 weeks. I'm Nicole D'Angelo, Mission Coordinator for the last 3 missions. It is with sadness that I announce the death of the first Kerbonaut, Mitzi Kerman. This is the mission in which Mitzi set out to land on the moon and retrieve some rocks and bring them back to us. Mitzi had one of the most advanced rockets that was testing quite a number of systems. Everything was successful in this mission, as you will see. Here's the rocket that we produced for Mitzi. Not so bad if you look at it. Lots of different things going on, bells, whistles, wheels. We didn't know what he would need up there, so we put a little bit of everything on this rocket. Needless to say, the kitchen sink launched, got into orbit around the moon, and then just didn't make it down. We will begin this debriefing by explaining some of the explosions that you'll be seeing. They are launching some external tanks off of the sides of the rocket to test the ability of the rocket to handle explosions nearby during takeoff. Why? Needless to say, there may be explosions at times during takeoff. The rocket is very heavy, it falls a little bit and then jets up to the sky. A very successful launch with Mitzi at the controls, ever so slightly reaching towards the sky. We pick up this next part with the orbital insertion that Mitzi performed just before his death. He was very successful, had a slight inclination so he can orbit and find a little bit more out about that dark side of the moon. And here we go. He hits the mark perfectly. We pick up with tests of both the landing gear and the landing legs. Landing gear was inserted on this ship. It was intended to settle this tank down on the lunar surface, giving Mitzi some place to store some extra fuel for the ride home. Next up is deorbit burn, which is executed perfectly. Settling down on one of the pieces of the far side of the moon, a nice plain with some open fields and just a few rocks. Really nothing hard for this landing at this moment. We pick this up as Mitzi is falling ever so slowly down towards the surface of the moon. Precision and skill will be needed to settle the tank down onto the surface of the moon without exploding. Remember, this is one of those missions where we had a purpose, thought that it would work, and found in the end it was just too much. Another few moments later, Mitzi is almost near the surface, settling very slowly down on the ground, and decides it's going to be too hard to get this ship to place this rocket very gently on the surface, so he lets it go. The safety of the Kerbonaut is much more important than the mission itself. Mitzi is using all the skill he has to settle this down as slowly as he can. At the same time, watching the tank below burst into flames and then start tumbling around in a low lunar orbit. He'll probably be able to get out and whoop, there it goes. So he descends ever so slightly, moving himself off of the incline and trying to get himself down towards the plane. Mitzi is showing the best skill of any of the Kerbonauts to date. And then, what happens? Well, we have a computer glitch. The computer glitched. Something about sticky keys. There must have been something at mission control that spilled on the keyboard, and it caused us to lose ourselves just a little bit, pick up a little bit of lateral movement, and poor Mitzi cannot take care of it and winds up on the surface of the moon, pointing sideways. This is where impatience did not pay off. We could have sent up a ship to take care of Mitzi, but he instead decided he'd be able to right the ship. With countless numbers of controllers telling Mitzi to stand down and to shut down the engine, he decided on his own to disobey and to try to get the rocket to stand straight up again. He spun the rocket and then lights the engine, and Mitzi is no more. We're sorry. For those of you that don't want to watch the graphic nature of this, please tune out at this point. And here goes Mitzi, lighting the rocket any minute now. Yeah, this slow ballet seems like it's pretty fun. He's actually looks like he's having fun inside the cabin if you look at him. And all of a sudden, turns in and says, "Well, I'm out of here. I'll catch you back at the bar at home." Poor Mitzi. Mitzi leaves behind no family. He did not have a wife or children, and his parents left him an orphan many years ago. Mitzi, we bid you farewell. The death of Mitzi Kerbal rocked KSA to its roots, but progress must go on, and within a week, another moon rocket was launched, this one with Joffric. Initially, the mission was supposed to be led by the top Kerbonaut, Jebediah, but Jebediah fell sick with the flu, and Joffric stepped in to take his place. The rocket launched without a hitch. It was very similar, if not exactly the same as the rocket before, without the additional test beds, which had already proven to be successful. Here we see Joffric about ready to light his engines, launching him to the moon. This time, the controllers over at KSA sent him the perfect solution for a low-altitude orbital insertion to lunar orbit. Let's pick up where things get a little bit more interesting. Here we see Joffric execute a perfect lunar insertion burn. Just beautiful. Look at that glow of the engine. Ever so slightly squeaking closer and closer to the lunar surface. Little by little, this mission looks like it's going to go off without a hitch. Much better than the last one. Well, then again, the last one was perfect right up to that last incident. Here we see Joffric about ready to get out of his ship and see if he can get any science that wasn't already gathered and sent back by Mitzi. Unfortunately, he was unsuccessful. Successful in getting out of his ship, but unsuccessful in finding any information that wasn't already gathered. And now here you'll begin to see why Joffric had our nerves right on the edge. Joffric is trying to do the same maneuver that Mitzi died trying to perform. That's trying to set this tank down on the ground so he'll have something to go and look at while he lands. To be honest, this is just testing the ability of the pilot to land another piece of a craft on the moon and then land near it. It's proving to be a little bit difficult with this setup. So Joffric has a perfect alignment and is just trying to get this thing to settle down right on the lunar surface. Let's take it in a little bit closer and cut to a few minutes from now. The lights from the ship this low caught some strange reflective properties and blinded Joffric for just a few moments. Still blinded from the intense light that was shown back up at him, Joffric is trying to settle this piece of the ship down onto the lunar surface and just gets it right there and takes off, and all of a sudden something goes seriously wrong. Now blinded and scared from explosions going off below him and then back on the surface of the moon, Joffric starts to panic. He tries to regain control of his craft, but is still partially blinded and can't read some of the instruments, specifically the radar altimeter. Not knowing how low he is to the ground, Joffric keeps on backing off and starting over again. Quite a few times, almost suffering the same fate as Mitzi. Little by little, he starts to regain his composure, but still has no idea how far he is from the initial landing site. Joffric tries to put down a couple of times and decides no. He needs to figure out where he is and how far away the now demolished craft he attempted to land on the surface is. For the next few minutes, Joffric is just going through a couple of panic attacks. He tries to land, finds that he doesn't have a good angular momentum, finds that he has too much lateral momentum, and keeps on bouncing up and down. Controllers are frantically trying to get Joffric back into control again. By this point, the controllers at KSA were frantically trying to get Jebediah on the phone, who was still suffering from the flu and homesick. Jebediah eventually gets on the phone, and they patch him in through radio to Joffric and calm him down. But this goes on for quite a few minutes before that actually happens. And all the while this is happening, Joffric is wasting precious fuel that can assure his safe return back to Kerbal. At this point, people are thinking that maybe Joffrek isn't going to make it. Maybe they're not going to be able to talk him down. And again, Joffrek almost winds up deleting himself from the program and winds up taking back off into the sky. Right about now, we were actually able to get through to Jebediah, who's beginning to try to calm down Joffrek. And little by little, is trying to get him under control, trying to make him understand that by doing what he's doing, all he's doing is wasting fuel. Just get the ship on the moon and worry about everything else later. And we can hear Jebediah at this point telling Joffrek, "You're a great pilot. You can do this. Just suck it up, look around you, and get this baby on the moon and stand on the moon with glory for the Kerbal people." And here we go. Joffrek has decided it's time. Cuts off that last little bit of lateral movement. Centers the nav ball. And he begins to let the ship fall gracefully back to the lunar surface. Little by little, just adding a tiny bit of thrust. Trying to undo all the wrong he's done up to this point. And little by little, inch by inch, getting closer and closer to the surface. Everybody at this point was sitting on the edge of their seat, wondering if the conversation Jebediah had with Joffrek has worked. And little by little, it becomes apparent that the conversation was successful. Joffrek is getting the ship down to where it belongs, on the moon. And he lands. All but a very, very hard landing, that is. Hours later, after preparing himself for EVA, Joffrek descends down the ladder and tumbles towards the surface. Running, finally happy, he stands and gets ready for a picture. Joffrek then collects important data, collects some surface samples, and plants a flag. And thanking Jebediah for all his help in saving Joffrek's life and helping to continue on this wonderful space program, he plants Jeb's flag and promptly names the site in a very simplistic name, Kerbin's on the Moon. As a secondary mission goal, the mission controllers sent Joffrek to look for pieces of the failed landing of the extra piece of the ship that they were trying to place gently on the surface. Joffrek found an engine, and that was it. No other pieces were found anywhere on the surface, which is kind of strange. Joffrek is now testing out his brand new space jetpack, showing how it can get him much more maneuverability on the surface of the moon, being able to quickly get back and forth great distances. However, there is very limited supply of fuel, and he needs to refuel very often. So he sets down and walks the rest of the way to the ship, until of course he feels that it's way too far. What a view he has up here, right? Such a gorgeous view. Let's jump on to the next piece of the mission, the return home. A flag, an engine part, and a couple of footprints are all that stands back on the lunar surface, as Joffrek wiggles his ship up into orbit for his return flight home. Very successful. And again, the first Kerbal to land on the moon. Let's take Joffrek a little bit further and see his descent back into his home planet. Here's Joffrek descending from high over the plains of Kerbal. Of course, this is land he'll never see, for the ship is meant to land in the water this time. Retro rockets installed in later flights, or more parachutes installed, may allow these ships to land on the surface of Kerbal. However, currently it is felt too dangerous to land the ship on uneven ground, as it may cause the ship to tip over and be destroyed. So here he is deploying all three main chutes, slowing down the ship for a very smooth, soft landing in the waters off the coast. A few moments later, his ship is gracefully settling into the water. Let's just watch as this beautiful ship enters the waters off the coast. And that concludes the mission recap of this second moon launch. The last two missions have allowed us to unlock many new scientific discoveries, making possible larger, faster, and more capable ships. This next launch is of an unmanned satellite called the Lunar Geographer. The Lunar Geographer is a test satellite that is going to be used to search other bodies for a resource called kethane. Kethane is important in spaceflight because it's the only resource on the bodies in our solar system that could be used to make fuel while away from Kerbal. So we launched this satellite in hopes of finding some on the moon and thus being able to build bases which can then be used to set out on even further journeys. Journeys to Duna or to Drell or actually to Jool. Jool would be a wonderful place to go. We only will find out as time goes on. Let's go to the end of this mission to see how our satellite did when it got into orbit around the moon. After a successful insertion into an almost perfect polar orbit, the Lunar Geographer has been finding huge amounts of the resource kethane on the moon's surface. What that means is that in the future we'll be able to land ships on the moon, extract the kethane, build bases, and build ships on the moon that then could reach out to Duna or Jool. And that's all we have for you this week. Tune in another few weeks for another recap of the STS launches. Thank you very much. This is Nicole D'Angelo signing off.